So there are some myths related to sourcing from China that I like to demystify before we go further. And the first one is, I remember when I first started sourcing, I was invited by a major jewelry retailer in a developing market. And they said, this is the design we want, this is the quantity we need, and we want to make sure we get the best quality at the lowest price. That just doesn't happen. You can get the best possible price for a quality that you've defined in a lot of detail, but you don't get the lowest price unless you hold the factory boss at gunpoint. In that case, you could just get it for free. There is this perception that factories are desperate for your business. And this is true to an extent because most factories in China are desperate for business. They work on wafer-thin margins. I mean, I've seen factories that work at 5 to 10%. But they're desperate for large orders because that's what keeps the factory running. So they have to make sure the production line is always running. But if they have to make 500 pieces of a product, each costing $3, then that's not always the most attractive business for them, requiring custom logo and customized packaging and all those requirements that Amazon sellers tend to have. So in that case, if you want a good supplier, you have to invest in a relationship with the supplier. You won't always get the best suppliers chasing your business when the orders are smaller. Another major misconception is China is cheap because of low labor costs. Now this is partly true because the labor costs in China are lower compared to the West, but I think among all the developing countries in Asia, China probably has the highest labor costs. A great example of this is India. The labor costs in India are about 1/3 of what it is in China, but India is the 7th largest trading partner of China and has a major trade deficit. We import pretty much everything from China, including toilet rolls. So why labor cost is a factor? There are other factors why China is cheap. One of them is the infrastructure. China has a very good manufacturing infrastructure, whether it's the ports, it's the highways. That makes a huge difference when it comes to your overall cost. Another factor is your availability of raw materials or components. You can pretty much source any component you want in China. Whereas if you were doing the same manufacturing outside of China, you would pretty much end up importing the components from China anyways. And finally is the economies of scale. Chinese factories are really good at maximizing the use of their resources, which is why the smaller orders don't always support their economies of scale model. And finally, factories, a lot of the customers assume that if a factory has been exporting to a certain country, say the UK, US, they understand the compliance requirements of that country and they will send the compliance product. I think this is incorrect in 97.2% of the cases. I just made that scientific sounding figure up, but this is not correct in most cases. When factories bid for your project, even if they did know the compliance requirements, they would probably quote for a non-compliant product unless you have defined the compliance requirement. And saying that you want a CE compliant product doesn't mean anything because that just means they'll put a CE sticker on it. So you have to be very specific with your requirements. So you need to understand what the CE requirements are or what the FCC, FTA requirements are, and you need to define them. Certain chemicals should be X%, blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, you as an importer are responsible for the compliance, and you have to take responsibility for the product you end up with.